Yeah, a long way from a stuttering kid. I didn't get enough love.
Hello. Welcome to the How Men Cry podcast. The How Men Cry mission and initiative is inspired to get 1,000 men to talk about mental health and vulnerability. I'm going to bring our guest in for today. It's the good homie, Dewayne. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing swell. How are you?
Not too bad. Just getting settled, starting off the week, and been diligently collecting stories and chatting with folks. So I'm excited to sit down and have this time with you. So thank you for making the time, first and foremost.
Absolutely. I have no idea what you're gonna ask me, so I'm ready.
Me neither. Half the time, no, I go off of a couple of general questions, and at the same time, I just like to let the whole conversation flow, as well. So throw up this random thing here. So first and foremost, tell me and the folks at home just a bit about yourself and what you do or projects that you work on.
Yeah. What do I do? I'll be out here. I'm a writer, comedian, actor. What jobs do I have? I've been writing on the Amber Ruffin show. I wrote for the reboot of Saved by the Bell, and also
Nice.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And then I'm writing a movie. So that's cool. It's called The Blackening. It's based off a sketch that I wrote for my improv group 3P, which Lisa is in.
Yeah.
Went viral. Then I got made into a movie. I'm co-writing it with Tracy Oliver, who wrote Girls Trip. That's been really cool. Grew up in Chicago, moved to New York for a little bit, then moved to LA, which is where I live now. Yeah. Anything else?
Awesome. Just, slight stuff. Be like, oh, I just wrote a couple movies. I'll be starring in this, and that. My friend. No, I appreciate it. Multi-talented. I've heard nothing but great things. So I'm not surprised.
Thanks.
I'm
trying.
Yeah. So what originally just inspired you to go into that line of work? Did you grow up knowing that you always wanted to do, more work in comedy and acting and writing, or was it just something that kind of that you kind of fell into?
Growing up, I had a really bad stutter, so like I did not even think that was possible. So I was like very much a kid that was told to make it out of the hood, you got to be as smart as possible. So I was like math and science. I'm gonna be a mathematician. And then when I went to high school, I got blindsided. Like the movie, a white woman was like, "Hey, little black boy, you so talented. Come do this improv." And I was like, "Okay." And then she convinced me to audition for an acting conservatory, and I was going to go to school for art. But she was like, "Oh, you should try to do this thing," because I remember I thought that like acting was just like a thing that was for like special people. Like, I don't know, you are cool, somebody finds you, then you're on TV. And she was like, "No, you can just like go to school for it and try to do it." And I was like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
And then I went to college for acting, and then I got cut from the acting program because I didn't trust white people. And I was like, "This makes sense." And then I started working at Second City, where I found a lot of people that I really enjoyed collaborating with, and that kind of solidified that, like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then as I was still in school, animating, because that's what I switched my major to, I realized that I didn't want to make cartoons. I wanted to kind of be one, and that just kind of validated my path in comedy. And I was like, all right, I'm all in. Comedy's the way to go.
Yeah.
Also, it's very easy now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. It probably comes natural. I don't know if I would do as well trying to write in comedy. I know nothing but dad jokes, so it probably ain't gonna be all that lit for me. No, it's funny, and I think one of the things Lisa actually mentioned as well too is I actually had a really bad stutter growing up as a kid as well, which like resulted in all types of whatever. Kids are tremendously cruel, but just around bullying, teasing, all this other type of stuff. So I can definitely resonate with that. So just a quick a quick congratulations, to you for confronting that and then still kind of finding your ways and your path. That's really dope.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's why I am so confident because I'm like, y'all don't know my life. Like, I couldn't talk, and I'm doing this. I'm like, well, if I can do this, then shit. Basically, I can do everything.
Yeah, no, that's dope. I appreciate that. So when you were coming up, or like, did you feel any type of, social pressure around um maybe who you needed to be in terms of what your career path was? Like, you mentioned something before of like your choices towards maybe the math or sciences or other things like that as some of your focal point. Do you ever feel like you had, or were competing with the narrative of who you felt like you had to be?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Like my the school that I went to was in my grandmother's neighborhood, and my grandmother's house was like kind of the crack house of the neighborhood. So just like the surroundings that I was in, it was very clear of like, oh, this is the narrative was like you have to like get out of the situation that you're in, and you have to be like better. And that was kind of pushed on me from a very young age, being like, oh, you're the smart one. You have to like
Mm,
be smart. And that's why before I went to high school, I didn't consider performing arts to be like a legit career path because that just wasn't what I was told was possible.
yeah.
And so it was, and then also being like a younger kid who's like, I'm pretty sure I'm gay. Like, that was also a thing of being like, okay, what path would be the safest and the most stable,
Yeah.
and have the least amount of risks. And math and science was very concrete. If you knew it, then you knew it. And so that was the path that I felt was the easiest to foreshadow and to
Mhm.
like create a plan for. Uh, but then once I did find the performing arts, I was like, oh shit, this exists. Now I'm gonna do this because math and science is not fun. I was like, oh, like you can enjoy a career. Who would have known?
Yeah.
So I'm very happy that I did make that pivot, and I'm happy that the way that it happened because I still have a very math and science minded brain, which allows me to exist in creative spaces in a very calculated way. And I think that's why my career has gone the way that it has, because I'm able to like see the full picture, break it apart, and then make plans in order to like, it's very much like A plus B equals C. And I'm just constantly creating variables and equations to try to navigate this industry that's entertainment.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And honestly, I've have a lot of parallels with that. Like, I ended up, I kind of have that duality. Like, my um, base career, I guess you could say, was in STEM, and then done a lot in like performance and music. And yeah, from like the marketing standpoint, the planning standpoint, all of that's been a lot easier, to use kind of that more. I feel like artists get a bad rap for not having like structured approaches to
Hmm.
things, but it's not even necessarily always true. It's just people's brains kind of work differently. And
Hmm.
yeah, going from vision to just that concrete um you know whatever it is, like, framework of getting it done. I just very much appreciate that too. So how do you, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I'm very much like a visual thinker, and
Hmm.
so in order for me to get something done, I'm like I have to. It's very much like Doctor Strange, just being
Hmm.
like, here's all my options, and being like, okay, which option is gonna get me to what I need, and then figuring out like how much energy is this gonna take. Do I have this? Okay, like what are the barriers? How do I circumvent these barriers? And just I constantly am just like thinking, and I
Yeah.
think that that is also something that stems from like having stutter is not being able to talk was very an internal
Mm.
experience, constantly thinking and being like, okay, how do I say what I need to say, knowing that I have this barrier, and having and taking that mindset and presenting that with like normal stuff and being like, okay, I have a barrier. My whole life has been circumventing barriers, and that's what it is. And I think that
Yeah.
mindset has just like I've carried that, and it has been so helpful. I just pitched an animated movie about a kid with a stutter, and and that's the first time I've ever like I'm very much a point of view driven writer where I use my life in a lot of my work, but that's the first time I've ever used my speech impediment in my work. I It's still like an active thing that I'm still like working through,
Yeah.
but it was nice to kind of recontextualize my feelings about it and see it from like what the benefits I got from it, and
Yeah.
thinking like, oh, like that's why I'm such a good listener. That's why I think so thoroughly. That's how I know the power of silence, the power of words, because of the experience that I had to experience as a kid, and knowing that like I can't say all my thoughts because I physically can't, and so having to exist in a way that was so cerebral, and then finally kind of gaining a little bit control over my voice and being like, oh, that thing that I just went through kind of gave me like a superpower, and now that I've shifted my mindset and now it's a positive, I feel very confident in using those skills that I've had to master because of this thing that I thought was so bad. And that
Yeah.
really has allowed me to flourish in a way that I'm very proud of.
Yeah, no, I love it. And that's, I mean, I can like where there's crazy amounts of overlap there because I definitely I just appreciate you speaking to that because I can definitely resonate with that feeling. Like, I went into performing like spoken word and music and other things like that where I was able to kind of find my voice in that way. And I think for me, like similarly, from not being able to communicate earlier in life, I turned a lot to writing or to, pages basically, to be that like listening ear when maybe it didn't feel safe and the world didn't feel safe enough to be a listening ear for me. So maybe a question on that would be, did you start writing or did you start creating in like other means when you felt like you couldn't speak maybe as easily at younger points in life?
I feel like as I like all of my skills have kind of come out of necessity.
Hmm.
Um, and so when I was younger, I didn't write very much, but I drew. Like art was like my art. Like I love to draw, so that was like a nice
Yeah.
outlet. And then once I found performing, I was like, oh, this is a greater outlet that I love. And then as I got deeper into it and was like, oh, I want to make this a career, I realized the barrier that was in front of me as like a gay black man and the roles that I wanted versus the roles that were available to me. So I was like, oh, if I'm going to, if I want this to be the experience that I'm fantasizing about, I'm going to have to create it myself. So then I started to write in order to secure my to make sure that I don't start to hate acting. So then
Yeah.
as I was writing and during comedy, I was like, oh, and like during sketch and improv working at Second City, that also became a very system feeling activity. So I was like, oh, I'm going to start doing stand up because that's the way that I can do and say what I want without having these barriers, which is like a system. So that's how I got into stand up. And then stand up opened me up to a bigger audience because I was able to be my unfiltered self and like this is who I am. So kind of my career kind of stacked on top of each other because I was forced to be in these spaces that were not good. And so in
Yeah.
order to make them better, I had to like take control to be like, no, 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 no. This is not the narrative I want for myself. I'm gonna go do my own thing. And so that's kind of how I've been leveling up out of necessity.
Yeah.
Um, even like I made a joke on Twitter, like I in quarantine, my hair was growing, and I was like, "Oh, I hate getting my hair done. I'm very tender-headed. Give me like 6 months, and I'm gonna be very good at doing hair because I have to be." I'm just like that's just like the way that my
Yeah.
life has worked. To be like, okay, here's a barrier. Got to learn a new skill to get past it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. That speaks to a lot of resilience, and also I think something really powerful about what you're saying, or even how you speak to a lot of this stuff, is that like you tap very much into either those like vulnerable parts of yourself or those parts of your story, and then you take it and weave it directly into your art. So a question would be, how do you relate to just the word vulnerability? Like, what does that word mean to you?
Um, I feel like that word in my mind is kind of like congruent with transparency of
Hmm.
just the ability to be open with your thoughts and emotions without like judgment. Like I don't have lots of like shame or like when I'm embarrassed, like it does last for a long time. Like I just feel like I've done enough existential thinking to where I'm like, oh, I like existing from a place that is more open
Mhm.
because it's easier because I already know how my brain works. So I'm like, oh, I don't want the burden. I don't want my feelings to just be my own. That feels very lonely. I want the
Mhm.
opportunity for people to feel like they know me. That makes existing feel lighter. Um, and yeah, I feel like the vulnerable, I've made it a mission to make that my neutral
Mhm.
because I feel like if I make it clear that my feelings are, and then it at least like if you know what I'm feeling, you have to then make an active choice to ignore my feelings or to acknowledge them, and then that allows me and gives me the information to know what to think of you. And
Yeah.
so if I am existing honestly, it allows me the ability to then judge people honestly and be like, oh, okay, so that I'm giving you my real. So how you respond to that then dictates what our relationship is. If I wasn't giving that, then I wouldn't know how to gauge the reality of like the
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like vulnerability is like what I would hope everyone is aiming for because I think that is the thing that allows humans to create relationships that aren't superficial.
Yeah. And how do you deal with maybe if things are not, well received in that regard, like if you've been hurt at all from maybe from leading in those ways, or maybe having to say, okay, I tried to be vulnerable with this person and that led to them having some harmful behavior towards me. How do you process that kind of thing?
I think that that is very fair. Similar to like improv, where it's like I bring a brick, you bring a brick, and then we see what it is. Very much like math, A plus B equals C. So if I'm giving A and you give B, that determines C. So like I don't have any say on what your variable is. So you're
Yeah.
gonna bring what you bring, and then that is gonna dictate what the relationship is. So if I'm being vulnerable and you receive that negatively, then I know, then like, oh, maybe then this relationship probably won't get to that level to where I feel comfortable being vulnerable. Therefore, we're probably not gonna be friends. Like that relationship is probably gonna stay at a certain level of superficiality. If I present vulnerability to you and you're able to receive that and reciprocate that, then I'm like, okay, we both share enough of the same emotional intelligence to be able to engage in this way. And
Yeah.
that will then dictate our relationship that way. But I can't be mad at somebody who doesn't contain the range to have a relationship the way that I want to, because that's just the reality of their existence. And I have to accept that and then process that through my own mind and be like, okay, this is the limitation of our relationship. And that's just what it is. I got to deal with that.
Yeah.
And that's just how I move through life. Be like, okay, what is the reality of this? Like where are we right now in this moment? And what relationship can we have that realistically acknowledges where we are as humans? And then just leave it at that. Cause like literally there's nothing else that we could do.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's a very, I would say, mature approach to processing or like experiencing relationships that doesn't allow you to get so caught up in maybe some of the weeds. Like you said, it seems like an easier means of existing. So just out of curiosity, how do you keep the balance within your mental space just in general? Or if I say, the words mental health or something like that, what does that mean to you?
I see it as like my brain, like my mental health, my like mental capacity is like a bank. There's a finite amount of energy that I have, and I'm constantly trying to figure out how much I have to loan out.
Hmm.
And that is both about like what I'm receiving, what I'm giving. So at any given time, I'm like, okay, who's taking my energy? Like what and who? And then I like look at those things and I'm like, is this an interaction where this energy is like profitable? Like, am I gaining something from this? If so, okay, then we can keep doing business. And if I'm not, then I'm like, okay, well, they are sapping from me and I'm getting nothing back. So let me just like kind of take these funds back, and then maybe we won't talk as often. And that's not saying that like we're not friends, but I'm just saying like at this moment in time, the energy balance is off, and in order to stay not depleted, I have to take some of that back. And it's a constant game of just like delineating what is worth my time and energy, and being like honest and truthful without like being bad. Like I think if you I like really try to exist in like an emotionally neutral place so that I can make very sound choices. And so I do kind of approach everything in a very math and science way until I feel like emotions are needed. Uh, but yeah, that's really much what it is. I just constantly am like weighing what, like I feel like there's like this like tether to me and people. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, okay, let me make sure all of these tethers are good. Oh, this is in the red. Mm-mm. That's in the mm-mm. And then like once I have more, I'm like, okay, I have a little bit more to give you. Where are you in life? Okay. And then I also think about like what the people whose relationships, like who, like what they have. So I'm like, oh, this friend is going through this thing. I know that they don't have enough to give me back something, but I
Yeah.
know I have like surplus to give them more because I know in this moment they need that. And just being able to like really look at my relationships in like a very open human way to see like what we just need to get through. And that's kind of how I try to stay sane. And then I realize what happens when I do feel like depressed and sad is that I've given too much of myself to people and
Mm,
things, and I have nothing left for myself. And now I'm like, oh, my neutral is now in red because I have overextended. I've overdrafted on myself. Now I gotta like, and then that's when I go like, okay, I gotta go somewhere and be alone for 4 days to like replenish what I've given out. And that's kind of like the checks and balances for my mental health.
yeah. No, that makes, I mean, I spend like a lot of times camping and in nature and other stuff like that for really for like similar reasons. And I think it gets mixed up, especially if you're doing something where maybe your work or your like social presentation is more so one of thinking that, people think you want to interact all the time. And I think I've had to like really make some of those adjustments myself to be like, no, actually, like, yeah, I need these 4 days to go be in the woods and I can come back and answer that question, or I need whatever time it is. So did you get to that point just yourself, or did you ever like have to take like ever go through a process of therapy or anything like that? Or have you just always kind of been able to self-regulate like that?
Well, I think I've had speech therapy pretty much my whole life, and so I
Mhm,
think that having that from a very young age, and because my speech was attached to my emotions, most of my speech therapy was about regulating my feelings,
mhm,
and so that just happened from a very young age. And I think also that's why I think the way that I think, because I had to know how to regulate from a very young age just to be able to talk. So I'm like, oh, if I'm feeling anxious, that's going to make it so that I physically cannot talk. Therefore, I have to sit here and process through these feelings to be able to communicate. And I think that's why my communication style is very much this, being like, okay, I have no feelings, I processed it, now I can just like talk, because that's what I've had to do to be able to speak.
yeah,
And then as I got older, I started to have like therapy specifically just for my mental health. And I think that coupled with just having therapy my whole life has been very helpful. So that when I do have therapy, it's not like basic stuff. I'm like,
yeah,
yeah. Like I'm like at the point of like, no, we are talking about like deep existential thought about like what is this? I don't need to like, and it's very nice that my therapists are able to be like, okay, we're having conversations about emotional intelligence at a level that you feel comfortable. And most of my therapy is not answers. It's just us exploring theories to questions that don't have answers. Because I'm like, what are we doing here? Um, and that has just been very helpful to be able to have a sense of perspective that
yeah,
allows me to have conversations. Because I know that like, oh, emotions are a temporary thing. Some of them are not real. Like you can have feelings about something that's just not real.
yeah.
um, and so to be able to have the intelligence to speak about emotions without feeling them, I think has been just like very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. And that's really awesome that you've had like these different kind of versions and forms of therapy along the way. Like it makes perfect sense in terms of how clearly you're able to kind of break down what's going on with you. And it's also great to hear it from the standpoint of there's no stigma in you discussing it, or even your level of comfortability talking through having therapy. And I guess maybe I would ask to you, do you, maybe it's not so much in your direct circles, but do you see within society like the effects of the stigmas that can come from people trying to pursue therapy, or maybe some of the barriers that keep people away from it? And in particular, I think with Black males, sometimes that can definitely stand out. So could you just speak a bit on that? It's not really a question, but just more so, I guess, open thoughts around that stigma.
Yeah, I definitely still feel that there is a stigma. I just think like Black masculinity just has a problem with just like homogeneous thought of being like, oh, if you are outside, then like you're different and that's bad. Um, which is I've had an argument with an older Black man recently who was like, Black people don't need sunscreen, and I was like, so why are we arguing about this? Like I don't. I was like, why are you? And then like within this room of Black people, like many Black people said, no, I use sunscreen. And then he was like, well, that's something new. And I was like, why can't you just expand your way of thinking to be like, oh, maybe my experience that I've experienced is not the
The whole,
experience. And
yeah.
like I was just like, this is great. Like this is sunscreen. And so and therapy is so much more controversial. But
Hmm.
I do think like slowly there is more conversation, because like we can't not have it. Because it's like
Yeah.
um and then and maybe and I do think that there is, and this is like a whole nother conversation, but I do think that there are levels of privilege that allow people like
Hmm.
at this point in my career, I'm at a place where I don't have like worry about like, is my bills getting paid, that I can use that energy to be like, okay, let me process the trauma that I've existed in since I was young. Like
Yeah.
we can't ignore that there is privilege that comes with having the space and time to think about your mental health.
Yeah.
And that's just harder to do if you're living in poverty. That's
Yeah.
just a fact. But just, and I don't have any answers, but
Hmm.
I do hope that with time the stigma does wear off. Because like I don't know. I have like growing up, I felt like the solution to most things was money. Because I was like, being poor sucks. Just go get better with money. Then I got a little bit of money, and then was like, oh no, this still ain't better. But how do you tell people who don't have money, ooh, this ain't
This
better?
ain't yeah.
because
It's a
like
confident.
like it
Yeah.
does get better with money. But then you got to really focus on like the thing that really matters, which is like the mental part, and that's the part I'm like, money don't really help that.
Yeah.
That's just like inside of your head. Um, so yeah, I it's a conundrum that I hope that there is some solutions to soon, because I do think therapy has changed my life in such monumental ways. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I love that, I totally agree with you. I get um just not to be comparing stories, but I've definitely experienced something as simple as, yeah, if I say I want to go outside and go camping or go hiking, probably a statement that I've heard more times than I would care to from a lot of Black folk is, Black folks don't go camping. What you doing out in the woods? We don't do this, we don't do that. And I'm like, y'all, we're like hella connected to nature and to like I'm like, have you
Mhm.
like Africa, man? Like it's kind of like our thing. So it's like, and
Yeah.
I'm not saying that is like any, I'm saying that as like a positive, a positive
Mhm.
thing of like we're rooted in having connection to the earth. And I think it's just fascinating, like you said, some of that rigidity. And I'm not even going pick on just Black folk. I do think that it is a relatively human trait, to get into
Mhm.
these boxes and then like rigidly hold on to them.
Yes, I
Um,
think it's just like a sense of protection, because you
yeah,
have to have a very strong mental fortitude to be able to ask yourself questions that don't have answers and
yeah,
not feel overwhelmed by existing, like once you do like, because like I remember someone that I knew who was like a writer committed suicide, and I was like,
Mm.
and I brought it up to my family to like have a conversation about suicide.
Hmm.
I was like, suicide is the thing that happens, and my family was so like, no, are you okay? And I was like, I don't want to commit suicide. I want to talk about the subject of suicide.
Yeah.
And they could not separate the idea of suicide and like feelings. And I was like, this is crazy. And it was just like a moment that I was like, oh, this is, I can't talk to y'all about this because like some of y'all haven't like expanded your brain to like outside of like religion to be like, oh no, like I'm talking about like the what emotions a person might feel to like make them want to do that. I mean,
Yeah.
and they're like, no, 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 no. You must, if you want to talk about suicide, you must be sad. And I was like,
Yeah.
no, I've had a great day. I just and so like there was, so even like stuff like that, I'm seeing how like emotions and kind of just like there's a cap on what certain people want to discuss, and there,
Yeah.
and my family was like, nope, that's not.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, this is, and that's kind of that thing that like I do it, be like, okay, this is clear of like what this like what this relationship is, like what, how far this
Yeah.
conversation can go.
With that
And
barrier
then
might.
yeah, and then like
Yeah.
seeing who in my life I'm like, okay, there are people that I can have a conversation about, just emotionally, just be like, okay, that's like, just be like, oh, that's the thing that happens, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
And so that like just moments like that also help me to expand my brain to allow people to exist with me, and like giving them grace to be like, oh, we're not at the same place, but I'm not gonna force this on you. Cause like
Yeah.
what is that gonna do? I'm just gonna have to recognize where we are and then find someone, if that's so important to me to talk about, then find somebody who has the space to want to talk about that thing in that way. That's
Yeah.
just, and that's, and I think that's how I stay so chill, because I'm like, all right, like you
If
want
you
to talk
like it,
about
I
that's
love it.
good.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
like what can you do?
yeah.
Like you are you, I'm me. I
Yeah.
ain't out here trying to change people.
Yeah. And so I have a question, and by any means you can pass or go for this question, but because you mentioned being like a queer man like within communities and stuff, I'm just tremendously curious because one thing I'll say is I am and have been irritated by a lot of the outlook from a lot of like Black men within the community. And again, I'm not trying to overgeneralize to say how groups of people, think or talk or anything, but I'll just say I've I've witnessed just from some of my direct family members and other stuff how like um just difficult, it can be to just comfortably and positively present as queer within our community. So I'm just kind of curious, about your direct experience with that, and like, if you, I guess, have dealt with positive or negative outcomes just from, being open with everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's both positives and negatives, but I think for me as a person, I'm constantly like navigating like where can I exist in the easiest way. Like
Hmm.
I work very hard so that I can eventually be lazy as fuck. I'm just like, I don't want to do nothing. I want to like, I just want to like exist in like the most easiest, chill, calm way. So if I'm in a space with Black people and people are like homophobic, I'm like, oh, this is not a space for me. I gotta go somewhere else. And I growing up the way that I grew up, I didn't think that I was gonna live past 30. And it was very funny because I talked to a friend recently and was like, the way that I'm constantly thinking, but I had no like fantasies or memories past 30. Like I just never saw me existing as an older person.
Mm.
Because I was always like, all right, let me just like exist in this moment so that I can just like do what I need to do. Um, and so is I've always kind of moved to what is for me. And when I first started doing writing and entertainment, my mother, I remember she was like, "Are you sure you want to be like as out as you are? Because so many people like are homophobic." And I was like, "No, no, no! Like that's how you ensure that you don't work with homophobic people. Because
Mm,
if they're homophobic, they will make it known. And then I'm like, okay, that's not where I need to be.
yeah.
And if everybody's homophobic, then this is not the industry that I have to be in. So like the
Mm,
universe will tell me what is for me. And so far, I'm out here thriving. So I'm like, okay, I've just navigated my spaces in the way that feels good for me. Race, like, sure, I love black people, but like, I'm not going to sacrifice myself just because we black. Like, I don't give a fuck. Like, that's crazy. I'm my own person. Like if y'all like, and that's why this whole like, I'm rooting for like everyone black. I'm like, yeah, same. But you give me a reason not to. Like, you can't just like be out here being terrible. I'm like, no. there's no guarantee I'm going to support you or like vibe with you just because you're black. But I am open to the experience because we might have a shared experience,
experience.
and
Yeah.
that's beautiful. But if we don't, I'm like, okay, like that's fine too. So I I am too busy existing in the spaces and with the people that want to be with me to care about the people that don't. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, I don't care. Like, clearly you're not for me. So like, you can waste your time and energy trying to, I don't know, be homophobic, but I'm not gonna be there. So like, who you doing it to? I don't know. It's not gonna be me. I'm be over here chilling with the people that like love me.
That already rock with you. Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah. And I just thank you for speaking on that comfortably, because I think it's just also a topic just depending on where you grow up, or where you are in general, mentalities differ. So I just appreciate you just being comfortable to even share that type of experience. So then switching gears a little bit, but not too much. So when I talk about this project, How Men Cry, and just the importance of it in general, is I feel that men can oftentimes cry out in means that are not necessarily just like physical tears. I feel like that men can cry out, especially in in connection to some of the narratives that we've derived around masculinity. They may cry out in means of violence. They may cry out in means of self-harm. May cry out in just a multitude of ways. So a question that I like to pose is, would you feel comfortable either sharing a story about a time that you've cried, or maybe just like navigating feelings of needing to let something out in like a vulnerable sense?
Yeah. I mean, last week I cry all the time. Like sometimes I don't even be knowing what I cry for. I was looking in the refrigerator and I was just like, some tears were falling. And my boyfriend was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, mm-hmm. And he was like, "What?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm crying. I'll figure it out." Like I was just like doing house stuff, just like crying. Like, and it wasn't like an active crying, but it was like, oh, my body needs to release something. I don't like. I'll figure it out. And then I was playing a video game and I was like legit screaming, just be like, ah! And my boyfriend came downstairs like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, what's wrong? And he was like, you're screaming. And I was like, oh, like, no, like, that's just like my body just like getting out feelings. So like in because I've created a very safe space, like in my house, like in my space, I'm able to just like freely let out feelings in ways that like I'm not trying to block.
Mm-hmm.
And so that has been very helpful. And I would like employ everyone to just like create a space where they feel safe enough to just like let their body do what it do. And sometimes
Love
I
it.
think that's the greatest outlet is just finding out organically the best ways to let go of your feelings. Um, like when I go to dance classes, I'm like, oh, this is a space where I'm like letting out energy. Um, that I have stored. Because that's I feel like that's the burden. It's just be like, oh, there's so much happening. So just finding how your body releases energy and then just like doing that, I think has been helpful so that I'm not always actively forcing myself to feel, but just like letting my body to organically and naturally feel what it wants to feel. So like sometimes when I'm just like sad for no reason, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna cry. I'm not gonna like question it. My body clearly has a feeling, so I'm just gonna
Mm-hmm.
cry. And clearly I don't feel a certain way in front of my boyfriend because he's like, "You crying?" I'm like, "Yeah, crying while I'm eating this food. I don't know." And then we just be laughing. I'm like, but like just giving yourself that space to feel, I think is has changed my life greatly, and that's kind of like how I deal with feelings, like because I do think there's it's so easy to allow your feelings to go to a bad place by
Yeah.
not processing them. Um, and I feel that way too. Like I feel like I'm constantly pushing my feelings down, and that's why I do allow that counter to be like, okay, since I do push them down, I also have to let them fly when they need to. So just finding that balance within yourself so that you ain't like punching walls and stuff. Because like just figuring out, and that's also a thing, if you have the space where you're like, this is a good outlet, I'm gonna punch this wall, like depending on the circumstances of your life, that might be the outlet. I have a friend who like breaks plates because I'm like, that person has enough money to buy plates, and that's like a fun way to like get out emotion. So
Yeah.
just finding out what are the healthy ways within the circumstances of your life that allows you to just like let it go. um yeah, that has done wonders for me.
Yeah, no, I love it. And that was something, a couple things. One, it took me a long time to not hold on to or have some kind of shame around feelings that I was feeling, or not overcomplicate exactly what you said, which is just like, if your body is expressing this stuff, whether it's stress, whether it's tears, whether it's whatever else, just having that ability to remove that block to actually feel through it. I think that's like a tremendously powerful lesson, and that took me just a minute to really sink into. And then the other part of like really knowing how to gauge and create those spaces for yourself as well, because that's something I'm really learning and like actively trying to implement boundaries differently, because I've run into just resistance at different points for like, I don't know, like liking the type of stuff that I like, liking to go camping or liking to do whatever, where I've, had the commentaries that I think I've been in spaces sometimes for like too long that have not been supportive of just who I genuinely like to be. And it's like just really figuring that out and like listening to it, and then just being like, okay, well, this is where I can be comfortable enough. Like now I would say my friend group or circle, all of us will probably be, sitting around hugging, crying, talking trash, whatever, within the same bubble. And it's all, and it's all cool. So excuse me, I appreciate you speaking on that as well. Just to kind of wrap it up, there's a bit of a two-part question that I like to ask. And the first part of that is, what do you feel like the world could use more of from men?
Whew. Yeah, I really feel like vulnerability, like the ability to like outwardly feel. Being gay has truly been the best thing. I'm just like, damn, I wish like whatever that thing is, I wish a straight man had it. Just like the I think heterosexuality specifically is the worst thing. It's just toxic. It's terrible. And it doesn't allow straight men just like the ability to truly feel. And I think that makes them sociopaths. And there's a lot of like men who their brains are literally just like stunted because they have not allowed themselves to process feelings.
Yeah.
And being human, literally number feelings is all feelings. So if you don't do that, you are going to be mentally off kilter with everybody else in society. And that's why I think society is the way that it is, because it's a bunch of men who will make a big part of the population just like not thinking, and everybody else is like, why y'all not thinking? we are out here being like, no, like there's a lot of feelings, like there's so
Without
much
feelings,
more
no, no
than
such
what
thing.
you've thought. Like you're missing out. And I think a lot of straight men are mad because they're seeing how much they're missing out on without the ability to like receive that. And that makes it's FOMO, and it's making all men crazy. And that's my theory.
So, to flip that though, so how do you think society or the world or
They
whatever
just
it
need to
is?
allow men to feel, and then men need to accept it within themselves.
Mm,
I think men need more confidence. I
mm,
think that's the thing. There's a bunch of men who are like parading confidence, but they're parading confidence in an image that is not allowing them to like actually be confident, which is having the freedom to explore themselves and still feel validated within themselves. And I think
mm,
that's missing. And enough. men don't have the confidence to be okay with being an outlier. And I think if more men felt that way, more men would be doing a bunch of stuff. And then a lot of men would be seeing, like, oh, I see a bunch of straight men doing things. Like now, like I've seen a bunch of straight men who are like painting their nails. And it's because there was a bunch of straight men who did it first who were like, I don't fucking care. I'm gonna paint my fucking nails. And then a bunch of people, and then a bunch of other men were like, oh, that straight man doesn't care. I guess it's not that gay. And then a bunch of straight men start, and like it's a very simple thing, but if you just have the confidence to be like, no, I'm straight and I'm gonna still wear the skirt, it could be revolutionary. But there's not enough men, I think, who like who are in spaces and they feel safe to be able to be confident.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate that. And then like it's funny too because it just reminds me like about painting nails. It's funny because I just gave myself a mani pedi yesterday, and it's hilarious because so many men like we'll mess around and be like hating on stuff that feels great. Like I'm like, have you ever gotten a like I didn't get a professional one this time. I'm like, but have you ever gotten a professional mani pedi? I'm like, it feels great. It's like, have you ever cried or let something out for a minute? I'm like, it feels great. Like so there's like this weird. I fully agree with you with this like. And that's, I mean, and honestly, it's what it's, you know, what a lot of my angle is for conversations like this is to help, you know, remove or back away some of those stigmas, because that like rigidity of trying to hold on to these ideas. And I've said it before, like one of the most foolish things we've ever taught men is like, oh, you don't feel or you don't whatever. And it does get disorienting because then you're walking around and your life is like, oop, that's not a real thing. Oop, that hurt isn't real. Nope, that doesn't have like it really does put us into, excuse me, a lot of crazy spirals that I don't think it sadly it kind of robs you of really richly sinking into your life, you know. So it's I just appreciate how you spoke on all of that. I appreciate how you spoke on all of these topics today and just how comfortable and, you know, just like open about your whole life experience as you are. So I just thank you for just taking that time. Is there anything you want to leave the people with in terms of places to find you or projects you have or anything, any words you want to say?
No, just like love yourself, be self-centered a little bit. I think self-centered is negative. Like I think it's negative how people think of the word self-centered, but I do think you should center yourself so that you can like love who you are. And then once you become that person that you love, it's easier to love other people. But you can find me on Twitter at Dewayne Perkins. That's DEWAYNE, or Instagram Dewayne K Perkins. Yeah, that's when I'll update y'all if I'm doing anything.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again. If any of the listeners want to find out more about the How Men Cry project, you can visit How Men Cry on IG or www.howmencry, blah, blah, blah. Y'all know the deal. If you found this podcast already, you probably know where to find some of it, at least I hope. But again, you know, just thank you for sharing so many gems and, you know, just coming on here and just talking about everything you have going on. I wish you the absolute best of luck, and hopefully we'll stay in touch and we'll find you on the interweb so that we can connect. And just thank you again for everything today. I really appreciate the talk.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
All right. All right. You take care.
All right.
Yeah, a long way from a stuttering kid. I didn't get enough love.